I was laid off at 54. Just like that, a cardboard box, a firm handshake, and 25 years of my life reduced to 10 minutes in a sterile conference room. The security guard walked me to my car like I was some kind of criminal, when all I'd done was show up every day for a quarter century. I drove home through Portland's relentless November rain, the windshield wipers tapping out a rhythm that sounded like a countdown clock. The ticking filled the room with an uneasy rhythm. Each sweep reminded me that time was running out. For what? I wasn't sure yet. Ellen was in the kitchen when I walked through the door, still wearing my company ID badge. She looked up from chopping vegetables, her dark hair catching the afternoon light streaming through our bay window. "You're home early," she said, and something in her voice made me pause. Not concerned exactly. More like wariness. "Ellen, I need to tell you something." I set the cardboard box on our dining table, the same oak table where we'd shared thousands of meals, where Daniel had done his homework, where we'd planned our future. "They let me go today." Her knife stopped mid-chop. She turned to face me fully, and I watched something flicker across her green eyes. Surprise, yes. But underneath that, something else I couldn't quite name. Something that unsettled me. "Oh, Mark." She wiped her hands on her apron and came toward me, but stopped just short of an embrace. "I'm so sorry. After all these years." I tried to read her face, looking for the concern I expected, the worry about our future. Instead, she seemed to be calculating something, working through possibilities I couldn't see. "We'll be okay," I said quickly, trying to fill the strange silence. "The severance is decent, and we have savings. I'll find something else." Ellen nodded, but that smile, polite, distant, stayed frozen on her lips. "Of course you will. You always land on your feet." That first week, I threw myself into being useful. I cooked elaborate breakfasts, French toast with fresh berries, eggs Benedict, pancakes shaped like hearts the way I used to make for Daniel when he was little. I suggested weekend trips to the coast, to the mountains, anywhere Ellen wanted to go. We could finally take that vacation to Europe, I said one morning, sliding a perfect omelet onto her plate. "Remember? We always said when we had time." "Maybe," she said, cutting tiny, precise bites. "Let me think about it." I even tackled projects I'd been putting off for years. The garage got organized until you could eat off the concrete floor. I fixed the squeaky hinge on the garden gate, repainted the bathroom, cleaned out gutters that didn't really need cleaning. But Ellen grew more restless with each passing day. I'd catch her staring out windows, checking her phone, finding reasons to leave the house. At dinner one evening, she set down her fork and said, "Dry as autumn leaves, I cook one meal and then it's already time to think about the next one." The comment hung in the air between us like smoke. I wasn't sure if she was talking about meals or something else entirely. Our nights, once filled with easy conversation about Daniel's calls from UCLA. Then other nights, talk about plans for the weekend. We grew silent, not from peace, but from the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. The evening news played to an audience of two people who might as well have been strangers. I'd reach for Ellen's hand during our usual spot on the sofa, and she'd pull away, claiming she needed water or had forgotten to check the locks. When Daniel called from Los Angeles, his voice bright with stories about college life and new friends, I found myself holding the phone a little tighter, hungry for his enthusiasm. "How's Mom?" he asked. I glanced toward the kitchen, where Ellen was loading the dishwasher with mechanical precision. "She's fine. We're both fine. And the job search?" "Going well," I lied. "Lots of possibilities." Daniel didn't hear the hollow echo in our house, the way conversations stopped when I entered a room, the careful distance Ellen maintained even when we were inches apart in bed. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came a restlessness in Ellen I'd never seen before. She started taking longer walks, joining a book club I'd never heard her mention, staying after her yoga classes for coffee with women whose names I didn't recognize. One evening in April, I came home from a networking event to find Ellen dressing with unusual care. She had on her black dress and was leaning into the mirror, applying lipstick with the kind of attention she usually reserved for special occasions. "Going somewhere?" I asked, loosening my tie. "Meeting a friend for dinner." She didn't look at me, just continued with her lipstick, a shade of red I didn't remember her wearing before. "Anyone I know?" "Just someone from the book club." She picked up a silk scarf, her favorite, the blue one with tiny flowers that I'd given her for our 15th anniversary, and draped it around her neck. Then came the perfume, something light and floral that I didn't recognize. When had she bought new perfume? "Which restaurant?" Ellen paused, her hand on the bedroom doorknob. "Does it matter?" The question hit me like cold water. I was just curious. She softened slightly. "Sorry. I'm just Mark. I need this time with friends. You understand?" I nodded, though I didn't understand. "Not really." I spent the evening alone at our dining table, eating leftover Chinese takeout and watching the clock. 8 o'clock became 9, then 10, then 11. I tried reading, tried watching television, tried organizing my already organized desk. At 12:47 a.m., I heard Ellen's car in the driveway. I listened to her careful footsteps on the stairs, the soft click of the bathroom door, the whisper of covers as she slipped into bed. She thought I was asleep, so I lay still, staring at the ceiling and wondering when we'd started being strangers in our own home. This became a pattern. Ellen's mysterious dinners with unnamed friends. Her phone, which used to sit openly on counters, now lived in her purse or pocket. She started humming songs I didn't know, songs that seemed to come from some part of her life I wasn't allowed to see. I told myself it was natural. After 25 years of marriage, maybe we both needed some space to figure out who we were beyond our established roles. Maybe this was normal. This feeling that we were circling each other like polite satellites. But late at night, when sleep eluded me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The life we'd built together, solid as our oak dining table, reliable as Portland rain, was developing cracks I was too afraid to examine closely. The foundation was crumbling, and I was the only one who seemed to hear it. The night Ellen didn't come home changed everything. I'd grown used to her late dinners, her mysterious book club meetings, her need for space. But this was different. This was silence stretching past midnight, past 2 a.m., past any reasonable explanation. I called her phone. Straight to voicemail. I texted, "Are you okay? Just let me know you're safe." Nothing. I sat in our living room as dawn crept through the blinds, still wearing yesterday's clothes, staring at my phone like it might suddenly produce answers. At 7 a.m., a text finally came, "I'm fine. Don't worry." That was it. No explanation, no apology, no indication when she might return. Just those 4 words that somehow made everything worse. Ellen came home that evening while I was heating up soup, Campbell's chicken noodle, the kind we used to give Daniel when he was sick. She looked different somehow. Lighter, maybe. Or maybe I was the one who felt heavier. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. She set her purse on the counter with deliberate care. I needed space to think. "All night?" "Yes." She met my eyes directly, and I saw something there I'd never seen before, a kind of defiance mixed with something that looked almost like pity. "Mark, we need to talk." Those 4 words every married person dreads. We sat at our oak table, the one where we'd shared so many meals, so many conversations about our future. Now it felt like a negotiating table. "I can't do this anymore," Ellen said simply. "This isn't working." "What isn't working?" "Me being unemployed? Because that's temporary." "No." She shook her head, and her voice was gentler than I expected. "It's not about your job. It's about us. About who we've become." I felt something cold settling in my chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need time apart. Real time. I'm going to stay with my sister for a while." "How long is a while?" Ellen looked down at her hands, twisted her wedding ring, a gesture so familiar it broke my heart. "I don't know." She packed that night. Not everything, just enough to make it clear this wasn't a weekend visit. I watched her fold clothes I'd seen her wear 1,000 times, pack books she'd read to me on vacation, gather toiletries from our shared bathroom. "What about Daniel?" I asked from the doorway. "I'll talk to him." "What will you tell him?" Ellen paused, holding a sweater against her chest. "That his parents are figuring some things out." "And what do I tell him?" "The truth." She looked at me with those green eyes that had once looked at me with such love, such certainty. That we're trying to find our way back to being happy. After she left, the house seemed to expand around me like a vacuum. Rooms I'd barely noticed suddenly loomed enormous. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was aggressive, pressing against my eardrums. I started drinking. Not dramatically, not like in the movies. Just a glass of wine with dinner became 2 glasses. 2 glasses became half a bottle. Half a bottle became whatever it took to make the echo of my footsteps less obvious. Laundry accumulated in baskets I'd start but never finish. Dishes crusted over in the sink because washing one plate for one person seemed absurd. The mail piled up. The garden Ellen had loved began to look abandoned, weeds creeping between her carefully planted flowers. Daniel called every Sunday, bright and chatty from his dorm room. "How's Mom?" he'd ask, and I'd lie with the fluency of practice. She's great. Really busy with her book club and yoga classes. And the job search? Getting some good leads. Should have something soon. I became an expert at deflection, at steering conversations toward his life, his classes, his new girlfriend whose name I could never remember. He never seemed to notice that Ellen never got on the phone anymore, that I never mentioned family dinners or weekend plans. 4 months blurred together in a haze of routine despair. Wake up, check job boards, send resumes into the void, drink enough to sleep, repeat. I stopped shaving regularly. I stopped caring if my shirts were wrinkled or if I wore the same pants 3 days running. One Thursday morning in July, I woke up on the couch with a splitting headache and a text from my former coworker, Jeff Peterson. My brother owns a real estate firm called Peterson and Associates. They need someone in finance. Part-time to start, but it could lead to something. Want me to put in a word? I stared at the text for a long time. Real estate wasn't my field. I'd spent 25 years in corporate finance, managing portfolios and analyzing market trends. But it was work. It was a reason to shower and put on clean clothes and pretend to be a functional human being. Sure, I typed back. Thanks. 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from Tom Peterson, Jeff's younger brother, in an office that smelled like fresh carpet and coffee. Tom was maybe 40, with the kind of aggressive friendliness that successful real estate agents cultivate. Jeff says you're solid, Tom said, looking over my hastily updated resume. 25 years at Sterling and Company Investment. That's stability. Yes, sir. We need someone to handle our books, maybe help with some of the financing side when buyers need guidance. It's not glamorous work, but it's steady. He looked at me directly. And Jeff mentioned you're going through some personal stuff. Sometimes being steady is exactly what a person needs. I wondered what exactly Jeff had told him, but I was grateful for the consideration instead of prying questions. When can you start? The Peterson and Associates office occupied the ground floor of a converted Victorian house on Hawthorne Boulevard, all hardwood floors and exposed brick painted white. My desk sat in what had probably once been a dining room, surrounded by the constant hum of agents making calls, scheduling showings, closing deals. The routine saved me in ways I hadn't expected. Numbers didn't lie or leave or require emotional processing. Spreadsheets behaved predictably. Filing systems stayed organized if you maintained them properly. Claire Donovan worked the front desk, probably in her early 30s, with auburn hair she wore in a practical ponytail, and a smile that seemed genuinely warm rather than professionally required. She had a way of making the coffee that actually tasted good, and she always asked how my day was going like she actually wanted to know. How are you settling in? She asked after my first week. Good. Really good. It's nice to have somewhere to go in the morning. Something flickered across her face, understanding, maybe. Jeff mentioned you'd been out of work for a while. Yeah. Longer than I'd planned. Well, you're a natural at this. Tom's been bragging about how organized you've made everything. Claire had a way of dropping small kindnesses into conversation. She'd bring an extra cup of coffee to my desk, or mention that she'd heard good things about a restaurant I might like. Nothing pushy, nothing that felt like anything other than business-like politeness. But it was nice to have someone notice I existed. One afternoon in August, she stopped by my desk as I was finishing up the monthly reconciliation. I was thinking of trying that new Thai place on Division after work, she said casually. Want to join me? I looked up from my computer, surprised by the invitation. It was just the two of us she was asking. Oh, that's really nice of you, but I'm pretty busy tonight. Of course, Claire said, though something flickered across her face. Another time, maybe. I nodded, already regretting the lie. The truth was, I wasn't busy at all. I just wasn't ready to sit across from someone and pretend to be good company, when I was still figuring out who I was without Ellen. Rain check? I offered weakly. Sure, Claire said with that genuine smile, though it seemed a little smaller than usual. Whenever you're ready. At home, I started making small improvements. I cleaned the kitchen properly, did all the accumulated laundry, even bought groceries that weren't frozen dinners or canned soup. I started going to the gym again, not consistently, but enough to remember what it felt like to feel physically capable. But every evening, I still found myself sitting at our dining table, staring at Ellen's empty chair. I'd catch myself setting out 2 glasses for water, or buying her favorite yogurt out of habit. Her coffee mug still sat in the cabinet, and I couldn't bring myself to use it or put it away. Some nights, I'd pick up my phone to call her, and stop of course, then remember I didn't even know where she was staying. The days grew shorter. Fall arrived with its familiar Portland rhythm of rain and falling leaves. I raked our yard alone, packed away summer furniture alone, watched the first frost kill Ellen's flower garden alone. I wasn't drowning anymore, but I wasn't exactly swimming either. I was treading water, staying afloat, waiting for something to change. Waiting for Ellen to come home. Or for the courage to accept that she might not. Waiting for my life to make sense again.
Julian Hayes. Even now, months later, his name still catches in my throat like a beautiful song I shouldn't be humming. I met him 2 years ago at Sunday brunch with my book club friends at Meridian, this lovely little place in the Pearl District, that served the most incredible lavender honey French toast. We were discussing the age of innocence, how fitting, though I didn't realize it then, when this man approached our table. He was tall and confident, with dark brown hair that looked perfectly tousled, like he'd just run his fingers through it. But it was his eyes that caught me. Warm brown, with little crinkles that suggested he laughed often. "Ladies, I hope you're enjoying everything," he said, and his voice had this wonderful quality, like aged whiskey. "I'm Julian Hayes. I own Meridian." My friend Carol immediately started gushing about the food, but Julian's attention seemed focused on me. When I complimented the atmosphere, the way morning light streamed through tall windows, the carefully chosen jazz playing softly in the background, he smiled like I'd given him exactly the right answer. "You have an eye for details," he said. "Most people just notice the food." As we were leaving, Julian joined me gently at my side. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" he asked quietly. My heart did something it hadn't done in years, it fluttered. Actually fluttered, like I was 16 again. I don't usually do this, Julian said, though something in his manner suggested he absolutely did usually do this. But would you like to have coffee sometime? I'd love to hear more of your thoughts about creating an atmosphere. I should have said no. Should have mentioned my husband, my 25 years of marriage, the life I'd built with Mark. Instead, I heard myself saying, I'd like that. One coffee became dinner. Dinner became long walks through Powell's books, where Julian would pull volumes of poetry from shelves and read passages aloud like he was sharing secrets. He introduced me to authors I'd never heard of, restaurants I'd never imagined trying, ideas that made my mind feel electric after years of comfortable routine. You're wasted in suburban domesticity, he told me one evening as we walked through Laurelhurst Park. The late sun filtered through maple trees, and Julian's hand brushed mine as we walked. You have too much intelligence, too much passion to spend your life managing someone else's schedule. It was a cruel thing to say about my marriage, but it felt true in a way that terrified me. When had I become Mark's support system instead of my own person? When did my dreams become so small? Julian made me remember who I used to be. Before Mark's career took precedence, I'd been professor of comparative literature. I'd published papers on Victorian women writers, taught graduate seminars, traveled to conferences in London and Paris. I'd had opinions about important things, conversations that mattered. With Mark, I discussed grocery lists, and Daniel's college plans and whether we needed new gutters. With Julian, I discussed Neruda's love sonnets, and the way different cultures understand romantic obsession. You're blooming, Julian said after we'd been seeing each other for 6 months. We were in his house, a converted loft-style home in the West Hills with exposed brick walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city lights below. It's like watching a flower that's been kept in shade finally get proper sunlight. I knew it was a line. Julian was the kind of man who had lines for every occasion, who understood exactly what women like me needed to hear. But that didn't make it untrue. I did feel like I was blooming, like parts of myself that had been dormant for years were waking up. The guilt came in waves. Lying to Mark about where I'd been. Deleting texts from Julian before Mark might see them. Creating elaborate cover stories about book club meetings that lasted until midnight. But the guilt was manageable when I compared it to the alternative, going back to my careful, constrained life. Being Mrs. Mark Reynolds instead of Ellen Morrison. Cooking the same dinners in rotation, discussing the weather and Daniel's grades, watching Mark read financial reports while I pretended to be interested in television programs I didn't care about. When Mark lost his job, my first reaction was relief. Finally, I thought, he'd have time to discover new interests, maybe remember what excited him beyond quarterly earnings reports. Maybe we could find our way back to being interesting to each other. Instead, Mark's unemployment made everything worse. Suddenly he was always there, hovering, helpful, desperately eager to please. He cooked elaborate breakfasts I didn't want, suggested trips I had no interest in taking, filled every silence with anxious chatter about his job search. The house felt suffocating. Mark's presence in spaces that had been mine during the day changed the very air. I couldn't read quietly in the morning sunroom because he was there, offering coffee and conversation. I couldn't take phone calls from friends because he was always listening, always asking who'd called and what we'd discussed. "You seem restless," Julian observed one evening. We were at his new restaurant, Harvest, which specialized in farm-to-table dinners that changed with the seasons. "More distracted than usual." "Mark's home all the time now," I said, cutting my salmon into tiny pieces I wasn't really eating. "I feel like I can't breathe in my own house." Julian reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His fingers were long and elegant. "You know you don't have to live that way," Julian said quietly. "You're not trapped, Ellen. You're choosing to stay trapped." The words hung between us like a challenge. That night, I lay in bed next to Mark, who was snoring softly, the sound that had once been comforting but now seemed like just another intrusion, and thought about choosing. About what I wanted versus what was expected of me. Julian was right. I was choosing this life every day, choosing safety over excitement, security over passion. But 50 years old. Wasn't it time to choose myself for once? The decision, when it finally came, felt both inevitable and shocking. Mark had been particularly clingy that day, following me from room to room, asking what I was reading, what I was thinking, if I wanted company while I did laundry. Like a puppy that couldn't bear to be alone. That evening, I drove to Julian's and said the words I'd been practicing in my mind for weeks: "I want to leave my marriage." Julian's face lit up with a smile that made me feel like I'd just given him the most wonderful gift imaginable. "Are you sure?" he asked, pulling me into his arms. "It's a big step." "I'm sure." And in that moment, surrounded by Julian's warmth and the scent of his cologne and the promise of a life that belonged entirely to me, I was sure. The practical details felt surprisingly simple. I'd stay with my sister Linda until Julian and I figured out our next steps. Mark and I would need to have difficult conversations about divorce, about dividing assets, about telling Daniel. But all of that seemed manageable compared to the alternative, spending the rest of my life pretending to be content with contentment. I packed my bags, taking only what I needed immediately. Everything else, the photo albums, the wedding china, the accumulated possessions of 25 years, could wait. As I loaded my car in the pre-dawn darkness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation for the future. Whatever came next would be my choice, my adventure, my life. I was finally free to discover who myself might become. Life with Julian sparkled in ways I'd forgotten were possible. His hilltop house in the West Hills felt like something from a magazine: floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a kitchen with professional-grade appliances that Julian actually knew how to use. "It's too big for just the two of us," I said one morning, standing in the enormous living room. Julian wrapped his arms around me from behind. "Then we'll have to find ways to fill it," he murmured against my neck. Everything about our life together felt deliberately beautiful. Wine at midnight on his deck, watching the city lights twinkle below us. Spontaneous trips to the coast, where we'd walk hand in hand along beaches I'd never seen. Surprise flowers left on my pillow, exotic orchids that looked like they belonged in a fantasy novel. I even found work again. Portland State University needed an adjunct professor for their comparative literature department, and for the first time in 10 years, I was myself again. Standing in front of a classroom, discussing 19th-century novels, I felt like I was inhabiting my own skin, after years of wearing an ill-fitting costume. Julian threw a dinner party to celebrate my first week teaching. All his friends came, entrepreneurs and artists, people who traveled regularly and had opinions about architecture and film. I felt like I belonged among these sophisticated people who discussed things that mattered. In September, on my birthday, Julian surprised me with a sapphire ring. The stone was gorgeous, a deep blue that reminded me of the evening sky, set in a platinum band that caught light from every angle. "I want to build a life with you," Julian said, sliding the ring onto my finger. I thought about Mark's proposal 26 years ago. He'd been so nervous he'd almost dropped the ring, stammering through a speech he'd obviously practiced but couldn't quite remember. We were in our tiny apartment near the university, and he'd gotten down on one knee next to our second-hand couch. "I know I'm not the most exciting guy," he'd said, "but I love you more than I knew it was possible to love another person. Will you take a chance on boring, reliable Mark Reynolds?" Julian's proposal was more sophisticated, much smoother, romantic, but I found myself missing that flustered, heartfelt moment. "Yes," I told Julian. What else could I say? This was my new life. As autumn settled into winter, our life took uncomfortable rhythms. Julian's restaurant demands meant late nights and weekend work, but I had my teaching, my reading, my own projects. We settled into patterns: Sunday brunch at Meridian, Friday movie nights, Tuesday evening walks. One morning in early November, getting ready for class, I was searching through my jewelry box when my fingers brushed against something I'd forgotten: a small heart-shaped gold necklace with 3 names engraved on the back: Ellen, Mark, Daniel. Mark and Daniel had given it to me during our trip to Hawaii when Daniel was 9. We'd spent a week at a resort in Maui, and Daniel had been so excited about his first plane ride, his first time seeing the ocean. The 3 of us had eaten dinner every night on our hotel room's patio, Daniel chattering about everything he'd seen, while Mark and I smiled at each other over his head. For the best mom and wife in the world, Daniel had announced when they presented the necklace. Mark had looked so silly and pleased with their surprise. I sat on Julian's bed, holding the necklace, and felt my chest tighten with unexpected emotion. When was the last time I'd really talked to Daniel? When was the last time I'd thought about Mark as anything other than the life I'd escaped from? A memory surfaced. 3 years ago, I was miserable with food poisoning, and Mark stayed awake all night with me. I remember the quiet way he brought me water and crackers, checking that I was okay without a single complaint. Just his presence made the night a little easier, and even now, I can still feel that care lingering around me. "Stop it," I told myself firmly. "You're happy here, this is what you want." But over the following weeks, memories kept surfacing at unexpected moments. Daniel learning to ride a bike, Mark running behind him with one hand on the seat. Family game nights around our dining table, all of us arguing good-naturedly about Scrabble rules. Mark singing off-key in the shower, a habit that had once annoyed me but now seemed endearingly human. Julian planned more elaborate surprises. A weekend in San Francisco, tickets to the Portland Opera, a wine tasting trip to the Willamette Valley. I posted photos on social media: Ellen at elegant restaurants, Ellen at gallery openings. My sister Linda commented on every photo, "You look so happy." Even Daniel seemed impressed when I told him about the opera and Julian's connections in Portland's cultural scene. "Mom, you're living your best life," he said during one of our weekly phone calls. So why did I feel like something was missing? The answer came to me on a cold day in late November. I was driving home from campus when I passed a family by the river, parents and 2 children, feeding ducks. The father lifted the smaller child to his shoulders, and the mother laughed at something the older child said. They looked so connected, so easy with each other. Not sophisticated or dramatic. Just solid. Content. Like they belonged to each other in a way that didn't require constant performance. I pulled over and sat in my car, watching them, and suddenly I was crying. What had I traded away? 25 years of history, of shared jokes and comfortable silences. Daniel's first steps, his graduation, experiences that belonged to Mark and me together. That night, after Julian fell asleep beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. This beautiful house, this exciting life, this sophisticated man, it was everything I'd thought I wanted. But it wasn't home. Home was Mark reading while I graded papers. Home was Daniel calling every Sunday, both of us listening on speakerphone. Home was knowing that someone would notice if I was 10 minutes late. Julian loved the idea of me, the sophisticated woman who could discuss literature and looked elegant at dinner parties. But did he love the real me? The me who got cranky without enough coffee, who cried at sappy movies, who worried obsessively about Daniel. Mark had loved all of me, even the parts that weren't particularly lovable. Especially those parts. The next morning, everything was clear. Julian was in the kitchen making his perfect espresso when I came downstairs. "Good morning, beautiful. Sleep well? Julian, can we talk please?" Something in my voice made him set down his cup. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. But this, us, isn't working for me anymore." His face went carefully blank. "Is this about the restaurant schedule?" "No. It's about me. About what I need versus what I thought I needed." Julian was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentler than I'd expected. "Is this about your husband?" "It's about my family. About the life I walked away from before I really tried to fix what was broken." Julian nodded slowly. "I can't say I'm not heartbroken. But I understand." He reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. "I know that you're not the kind of woman who can just walk away from 25 years without looking back." I thought I was. Real strength is knowing when to fight for what you've built, not just when to walk away from it. We spent the morning talking. Julian helped me pack my things. "Will you be okay?" I asked as I loaded my car. "I'll be fine. Ellen. I hope you find what you're looking for." I drive slowly down Maple Street, past the neighbors' houses I know by heart. The Johnsons' blue shutters, Mrs. Lee's rose bushes wrapped for winter. Everything looks smaller than I remember, more fragile somehow. Our house sits quiet in the November light. The maple tree we planted when Daniel was small stands bare, its branches etched against gray clouds. I can see Mark through the front window, papers spread across our oak dining table. His shoulders are straighter than when I left, less burdened. When he looks up and sees me, time stops. We stare at each other through glass and distance, two people who shared 25 years learning to be strangers. His face shows surprise, wariness, then something careful that might be hope. I sit in the car another moment, hands trembling on the wheel. This is the hardest thing I've ever done, not leaving, but coming back. Not running towards something new, but choosing what I already had. Mark appears on the front porch, neither approaching nor retreating. Just waiting, as he always did. The path to our front door has never seemed longer. Each step carries the weight of months apart, of words that can't be unsaid, of trust that must be rebuilt stone by stone. Ellen. He says my name like he's testing its shape in his mouth. Hi. My voice comes out smaller than intended. Come in. It's cold. Inside, the house feels both familiar and foreign. He's rearranged the living room, and there are fresh flowers on the kitchen counter, simple chrysanthemums that catch the afternoon light. We sit at our table where we've shared thousands of meals, where Daniel did homework, where we once planned our future. The silence stretches, but it's not uncomfortable. We remember how to be quiet together. I made mistakes, I say finally. We both did. I don't know if we can fix this. Mark reaches across the table, his hand stopping just short of mine. Maybe we don't fix it. Maybe we build something new. Outside, rain begins to fall, gentle rain against windows, washing everything clean. I look at this man who knew me at 22, who watched me become a mother, who let me leave when staying felt impossible. I missed you. I whisper. His smile is tentative but real. Then let's start here. Right now. Two people who used to love each other, learning how again. I am home.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more heartwarming stories to enjoy.